we will start by having the four members of faculty who are with us this evening as our guest speakers to introduce themselves, please. And for the sake of organization, we'll start and we'll do that alphabetically. So Professor Barb Anderson, you are up first.
Thank you, Una. Oh, welcome everybody. It's really wonderful to be a part of this inaugural panel and to have so many interested people around the topic that we'll be discussing this evening around healthy living in a pandemic. So I'm Barb Anderson, and I have recognized some names, so I know some of you out there in virtual land. I graduated from Acadia in 1977 and then went on and did a dietetic internship. So I am a registered dietitian. And I then actually did my graduate work in adult learning. So that's the area that I'm really interested in, is how do people learn various topics? And in my case, it's nutrition and dietetics. So I did a 30-year gig in public health before I came to Acadia about 12 years ago, and really have enjoyed coming back to campus and getting to know a lot of the people who are in Wolfville and who are on this call as well. So thank you very much for including me in your evening.
Thank you, Barb. Kathryn.
Hi, thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. My name is Dr. Katherine Bell. I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department here at Acadia. I'm very new to the Acadia community. My family and I moved to Nova Scotia from the state of Ohio in the United States back in July. But my family's not new to Canada. I actually have roots in New Brunswick, so it's kind of neat to be rerouting our family back here in the Maritimes. My background, I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm registered in Nova Scotia. My research area focuses predominantly on interpersonal violence, but clinically, my specialty areas are in the area of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and related conditions. So it's a pleasure being here with all of you today.
Thank you, Kathryn. Over to you, Jonathan.
Hello, my name's Jonathan Fowles. I'm the director of the Center of Lifestyle Studies at Acadia University, which is housed in association with the School of Kinesiology. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I'll be talking to you about physical activity and its interrelated components. And I have been at Acadia now for 20 years. So I'm a displaced British Columbian, but I now call Nova Scotia home.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. And last but most certainly not least, Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Robbins, and I serve as president of Acadia Divinity College, the dean of theology for the university. And I am also the Millard Cherry Professor for Theology, Ethics, and Culture. That's my passion, actually, is how faith and kind of the world we live in relate to one another. And I do research and speaking and writing in that, as well as direct the McRae Center for Christian Faith and Culture. I am a two-time grad of Acadia back in my grad days, 93 and 97. And I have a great passion for Acadia as a whole, and not only for the Divinity College. I think it's such a unique place, and it's a great opportunity to be able to serve you tonight. I'm also an ordained Baptist minister and have been for a long time. So a heart for people, to meet people where they are in terms of any needs they have spiritually, whether they're hurting or rejoicing. So just that coming alongside of people has been a part of what I am and who I am for a long time. Welcome tonight. It's going to be fun.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And thank you again, as I say, to the four panelists who have joined us this evening on what is currently in Wolfville, a beautiful sunny evening. So we're going to start with one question that I'm going to direct at all four panelists, if I may. And just to keep things interesting, once I pose the question, let's have respondents in a reverse alphabetical order. So the question is, what is one thing that you have learned about yourself and or struggled with in this situation and time of isolation?
I guess that means I have to go first, doesn't it?
That does.
I was always, I used to wrestle with people who said, Anna, you're a control freak. And I used to say, I am so not a control freak because I can be quite lazy. I can chill out with the best of them. And I think ending up in a time when we seem to be controlling nothing, I was probably more of a control freak than I ever realized. And I read an article today that was actually, it was insightful because I felt understood, if you know what I mean. And this article said the only way we can describe where we are right now is like someone who's climbing in the mountains and the mist has descended, and all you can see are your own 2 feet. And all you can do is put one foot in front of the other. And so, although I would like to think I've been practicing that for a long time, in reality, I probably have been much too often lifting my head and looking in the far distance. So I've learned that about myself, still in the process of learning that about myself.
Thank you for sharing. Jonathan, you're up next.
Learned about myself. Well, the biggest thing is that homeschooling a 9 and 11-year-old at home while two parents also trying to work from home is incredibly hard. It's not only hard the way I've reframed it, the thing that I learned, and this I actually got from a webinar as well, is that I'm at home taking care of my family and trying to work is kind of how I've reframed it, is because we have these expectations about what we can do at work and things. And the most important thing right now is to be there for our family, be there for our kids, our partners, and put one foot in front of the other and take it, because this thing changes every week, every day, every whatever, and you just have to, again, put one foot in front of the other and kind of just exist. And that's what I did today with my kids, and I had a great time.
Terrific. And you're absolutely right. The changes happen so regularly. And I guess the new catchphrase or the catchword is to pivot. Pivot with the next piece of information that we've been presented with. Kathryn, your turn.
Well, similar to Jonathan, I think one of the challenges I've faced is the work-life balance with two children in the home as well, which is why I'm hiding out in the basement right now to do this in the hopes that I might not get disturbed. But I guess the other challenge beyond that is, one of my kind of newer research lines that I was working with a student on this year was on uncertainty and the relationship between uncertainty and anxiety and conflict. And I didn't realize that a couple months later, I was going to be actually sitting in that uncertainty with the rest of the world and not really knowing what the future holds, and having to try to explain that certain uncertainty to my children and still give them that sense of control within their own lives, even though we're not able to really predict what the future holds.
So true. So I'm going to keep myself on mute as often as possible. I seem to have a cacophony of crows in song outside my window, so hopefully that's not going to be too noisy. And Barb, over to you for that intro question.
Oh,
Barb, you are on mute.
I really took the instructions very seriously.
Very seriously.
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me is about not being able to physically connect with people. So, we were talking with my son last night, and he's in Boston. And so today we were actually going to be flying out after convocation to take a little trip to visit him. And so, the thought that that's not going to be able to happen and we don't know when is definitely something that I'm struggling with. Also, my mom is in a assisted living facility, and we haven't been able to see her for 8 weeks. And she has dementia, and so doesn't understand why we're not able to go and visit. And so that's a real struggle as well. But I also recognize how privileged we are. Like, I've listened to people who've talked about being in the war and recognizing that if they walked out of their house, they might not be able to get down to the end of the street. And so, we are so fortunate that that's not the case for us, that we're really doing what we're doing through public health measures to support each other and to really try to help my mom and help other people who are very much possibly susceptible to getting COVID. So Yeah, along with the struggle is also the celebration of everybody that's working collaboratively.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Barb. And you're absolutely right. We are all very much in individual circumstances, and they're all very, very different for sure. So I'm going to start with some directed questions at each of our panelists, just to get, as I say, the conversation flowing, and then we will have an open Q&A period for attendees on the line. So the first one is directed at you, Kathryn, and it is, what can people do to take care of their mental well-being during this pandemic?
Sure. So I think there are a number of things that they can do. In general, trying to stay active and act in a way that is rewarding, fulfilling, or meaningful in some way to one's life is really important. Sometimes, and I'm guilty of this myself right now, there are mornings where it's like, is there a reason to take a shower or to get out of my PJs? Because I'm not seeing anyone today. But it's still important to stick with that routine, right? To take that shower, to get out of bed, to kind of do the routines that we're used to doing, and then finding ways to remain engaged in our lives, whether that means learning a new skill because it's meaningful to us, or that sense of mastery is fulfilling to us, or doing work because that work is also fulfilling and rewarding in some way. So keeping to routine, doing those things that are rewarding, fulfilling to us, and then also staying engaged with people. So even though we're physically distancing right now, we don't have to socially distance. There are still ways to have meaningful connection with other people, with friends and family from afar, as well as other kinds of social support networks, right? So there are also professional organizations out there and support groups online. I mean, the good thing is that we're living through a pandemic at a time when we've never been more connected virtually. And so being able to use that technology in a way that allows us to remain connected to the rest of the world. And then also being able to give to others, because we know that when we give to others, that also has an impact not only on others, but on ourselves as well. And so finding out ways that even from afar, we can make a difference in other people's lives, can have an impact on ourselves as well.
For sure. When I hear you say meaningful tasks, for me, unfortunately, a lot of the time, that means eating. And my meaningful task is making a meal to, fill in the void. So with that in mind, Barb, what are healthy eating priorities that you would recommend during the pandemic?
So what's interesting is that it's not unlike some of the things that Kathryn just said. When we're talking about healthy eating, sticking to a routine and having a healthy eating pattern that's really not that different from what you would be eating under non-COVID situations, if you will. So if you normally had a breakfast, lunch, and dinner with some snacks, there's no reason why you have to change that routine at all. The big thing is to continue to eat a healthy pattern of eating. And so that is choosing things like fruits and vegetables, if you can access those, grain products. You definitely want to consume some beans or some lentil products if that is a normal part of your healthy eating pattern, nuts and seeds. Basically what I would tell somebody to consume in a regular question about what should I eat as a healthy pattern of eating. Routine is important, healthy eating is important, and don't beat yourself up if you screw up now and then. Like, it's okay, right? So these are really trying times, and so therefore, if you do make a pan of brownies and you have a couple, then that's okay. Maybe freeze the rest, but you don't have to eat the whole thing. But it is important to recognize that do things that are important for yourself around being healthy. Make those healthy choices most of the time. And my way of suggesting that really doesn't differ much from what if somebody called me up and asked, what should I eat that's healthy? Very similar response.
Absolutely. I smile because, it great advice. And it oftentimes, sometimes, right, it's hard, especially when you have that pan of brownies. And combined with that, of course, many of us are on video conferencing. You know, we've got meetings virtually, so we're spending a lot of time sitting and not moving, right? And so to that, I've heard a lot that being sedentary is being sort of called the new smoking. And how bad, Jonathan, is it for us to be isolated at home during this time?
Well, it's the right thing to do. Unfortunately, people don't realize how much their daily routines probably provide physical activity throughout their day. You know, just getting to work, you know, parking your car, walking to your office, going for coffee, or doing something at lunch. There's a lot of intermittent physical activity that people normally get through their day that when you are isolated at home can disappear. And in studies that we've done, somebody who works a desk job might, you know, anything below 5,000 steps a day is considered sedentary. And many people that work a desk job average about 3,500 steps a day. So you have to consciously, you know, decide to move more when you're, you know, in front of a desk all the time or video conferencing or things like that. So the take-home message there is recognize that being sedentary does have effects on your physical health as well as your mental and psychological health, that our bodies were kind of designed to move a lot throughout the day, and that when we don't do that, our mood can change, and as little as 10 minutes a week can actually significantly improve your mood. So if being isolated inside and you're starting to feel a little blue, it could be because you're not getting that movement that you normally would throughout your day. So it's important to take advantage of the flexibility that you might have in your schedule now to walk around the house, walk around the block, do some things. The one encouraging thing I've really found is that I've never seen so many people out walking and bike riding in my life. It is maybe the freedom and the availability of time. Time is always the number one reason people cite for not being active. So one of the blessings in disguise of this home isolation is that people are getting out for intermittent walks and walking the dog, and it's nice because it's also providing a little bit of that social connectedness, because people, you know, say hi to their neighbors a lot more than I've ever seen in a while. So just getting out and being as active as you can, and be conscious that you do have to probably move a little bit more than what you normally would in your routine going to work or doing your normal daily routine.
Absolutely. And all of what we've talked about so far in terms of nutrition and emotional and mental wellness and physical wellness, all certainly plays a part and reciprocates with a piece of wellness that a lot of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about or talking about, and that's our spiritual wellness. So over to you, Anna, and what or how can healthy spirituality contribute to wellness in these difficult times?
I think you set that up well, Una, because I think it's true that when things are going well and we're busy and we're active and the demands of life kind of just crowd in on us, our emphasis tends to be on the material world, and we can sometimes forget, or and not everybody acknowledges, and that's okay too, but we can forget that human beings have this spiritual side that can easily be pushed off or dismissed in a time when work and family and all the rest of it kind of takes priority. And sometimes I think it's a time like this when people are maybe on their own more, and those basic questions of life, of human existence, kind of rise to the fore. You know, if I'm not my job, who am I? If I'm not this, what am I? What am I here for? Where am I going? And those kind of crucial questions of meaning rise to the fore. And I think our spirituality offers us a chance to reflect on some of those questions. And you know, there are healthy ways of doing that. And I think part of the healthy way of doing that is, first of all, acknowledging them and allowing those questions to rise and to give them voice and so on. I think in some ways we're ill-equipped for this questioning, again, in the Western world. Charles Taylor talks about it as the malaise of immanence. We kind of have ignored that there is maybe another part of human existence, and have pushed down those questions, so that when, you know, we're in a pandemic where we live in a world where we're not comfortable talking about death, for example. We talk about how we fight death, how we put illness off, but we rarely will sit around and talk about what is death? What does it mean? Do you believe that there is a life after death? And so we're kind of left now in these moments when death seems to be in the air everywhere, when on the news and otherwise, in a way that we can't push it off, maybe as we have before, that those questions are huge. And so I think it's a matter of acknowledging that we are, our spirituality acknowledges that we are humans in a network of relationships with each other, with ourselves, with the planet, and with God. And being able to explore that can bring a coherence to the rest of our lives that that enables us to explore some of those tougher questions, that enables us to make meaning in particular ways for ourselves, that give us a stability maybe in a time when all seems movable and we're just not sure. So who, if I'm not my job, then what am I? I think these are really important questions and discussions that we can have. Being healthy in it means being able to talk with other people about that, and being able to process that in some way in yourself. So I think that the exploration of those questions at a time like this, rather than suppressing them, is a beginning of a healthy spirituality.
Absolutely. And unlike some of my colleagues on the line who have small children at home, I spend a lot of my time alone in my home as a you know, a mom of grown children, and I spend a lot of time painting. And so I have a lot of time for that exploration. So, you know, there's the upside is, you know, while I'm painting, there's those thoughts and questions that I'm posing to myself and actually finally take some time to think about the answers. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So we've talked a little bit about sort of some general comments around wellness and health and certain things that we should be doing on outside of pandemic situations, but most certainly during this time, and some reference to you know, our immune system and sort of what kind of targeting or tackling of our immune system may be going on during this time. So question back to you, Barb, as we start to talk a little bit about immune systems. Is there anything I can do for food and nutrition wise to boost my immune system during this time?
So that is a really good question. We are inundated right now with messaging around immune system boosting as opposed to maintaining an immune system, which is the answer that I will provide you with, because there are no products that specifically will boost your immune system, regardless of what you hear on social media or you see advertised for lots of money. Being advertised in many different places now. But what is important is that you can support your immune system with a variety of factors. A lot of them you've heard here today from my colleagues. From, you know, healthy sleep is one, certainly positive mental health, from, you know, making sure you begin to ask yourself some of those important questions, physical activity and healthy eating. And so when I talk about healthy eating, there are certainly many foods that are involved in keeping your immune system healthy. And some of the ones that, you know, I mentioned before, so fruits and vegetables, foods with protein, you know, grain foods, nuts and seeds are all things that are engaged and involved in supporting a healthy immune system. But one of the things that's really important to remember, and you know, I can't say this often enough, is there is no single food, no supplement, or no natural health product that will prevent you from catching COVID-19. You know, what will is the public health recommendations of physical distancing and washing your hands. You know, I come from a public health world where those messages were certainly shared in previous outbreaks. And I can't say enough how important it is for us to continue to share those almost as a mantra with our colleagues, our friends and family and others we come in contact with. And don't buy into the hype that there's a magic bullet, because there simply is not.
Thanks for that.
A clear message, right?
No, absolutely, very clear message. In keeping with the immune system, in terms of physical activity, Jonathan, what kind of physical activity should I do to keep my immune system strong?
Well, One of the differences, like one of the things with physical activity, exercise actually has been shown to actually boost your immune system. That is one of the ways that you actually can strengthen your immune system. And I would kind of like what Barb was saying about a healthy nutrition to maintain it. If you think of it in the context of our bodies were designed to move a lot, and when we don't move, then things don't work as well. You can think of it in that way, that when you're physically active a lot and getting what we'd call exercise, but in our historical sense with just vigorous physical activity, working the land, doing all those things, that's what kept our kind of our challenges to our physiological systems kind of at their peak. And so when we don't move as much, then any system, whether it's our cardiovascular system, everything kind of goes down. So now the research actually shows that people who exercise actually increase their immune response and their immune effectiveness. So even to the extent that people who walk briskly every day, like get some nice vigorous walk every day, have 25% lower sick days from work, for example. Or people who exercise, or they've actually shown cancer cells, when they incubate them in a medium that has been exercised, that they extract from a human and grows, the cancer growth is actually 50% lower in a medium that has been exercised than one that hasn't. So there is some immune boosting abilities of exercise. But having said that, like I said before, the more you move, the better your body is going to be. And additionally, being outside and being physically active is also boosting, in the sense that nature has natural, for example, probiotics, for example, in that are emitted from trees and things, so that when you exercise outside or you're active outside, those are actually things that challenge your immune system to keep it strong. And the other thing is the sun, and a lot of our biorhythms and circadian rhythms and hormones and immune system function is also based on the biorhythms of the day and the sun and getting sleep. And so one of the things that physical activity outside does is that the physical activity not only sets your biorhythm to sleep better, but it also sets your biorhythm to the sun when you've been outside for a while, so that you're more naturally able to fall into a deep sleep at night. And deep sleep is one of the most important restorative things for your immune system. So having healthy nutrition, having healthy physical activity, preferably outside in nature in the beautiful sunshine, is probably the best thing that you can do, and try and do it as daily as you can, or multiple times a day.
Perfect. Now, if that recommendation to see more sun could come with a guarantee from you, Jonathan, that we will see more sun, that would be
like
fantastic.
Today. I know this weekend was a little hard on people with the snow in May. That was brutal.
Yeah, it was a little damaging.
Yeah.
So the physical and the nutrition and the sun and the being outside and nature and absolutely, for me anyway, feeds into my emotional wellness and my spiritual wellness as well, very much so. And so we've talked quite a bit about what we can do to the good things that we can do for those areas of wellness. But this question, Kathryn, is directed at you. What are some ineffective ways of coping with emotional stress and distress, rather, that some of us may lean toward?
Sure. So human beings are, I think, inclined to avoid things that make us feel pain, right? That's a natural inclination, right? So if we touch a hot stove, our reaction is to pull our hand back off of the hot stove because it hurt, right? And we tend to respond to physical pain or to emotional pain in the same way that we tend to respond to physical pain. So our inclination when we start to feel emotional pain or discomfort is to pull away, rather than to lean into that discomfort. The problem is the avoidance in that case kind of looks like our friend, but it actually can be our foe. And so we want to think carefully about acting on those urges to kind of avoid, because it might feel emotionally uncomfortable for us, and kind of the reasons for that. And a couple of examples where that we might see that. So for example, if I'm feeling depressed, I might be inclined to have a drink or two or three, especially if I'm home alone and I have nothing else to do and the alcohol is there. But that alcohol, using that alcohol, it might make me feel less upset in the moment. Maybe it even helps me fall asleep if I'm struggling with sleep. But the alcohol actually is a problem in the long run, right? It's a depressant, so it can affect our emotions and actually make us even more depressed rather than less depressed in the long run. It can affect our sleep. So even though I might fall asleep, if the quality of the sleep that I'm getting is much worse. Another example of where this avoidance might creep up and actually be a foe rather than a friend kind of speaks to what Anna was talking about. So right now, people are having to sometimes face pretty difficult conversations with their loved ones, you know. So for example, having to have difficult conversations about death and living wills and those kinds of decisions. I've had to have some of those conversations with my own loved ones, and those are really emotionally difficult conversations to have. And so our natural inclination, again, is to pull away from those conversations. I don't want to talk about this right now. You're going to be fine. I don't need, you know, I don't want to face this. And yet, while it might make me feel less uncomfortable short term, right, I'm missing out on some really important conversations that are probably pretty important to have in the long run. And so what we know generally from the research literature is that when people are inclined to avoid emotional pain in their lives, that tends to make the situation worse rather than better. And it doesn't mean that we need to go about our lives trying to seek out emotional pain, but also to understand that when we're feeling anxious or when we're feeling sad, those are natural emotions to have, and it's okay to be present with them and to just let them be. That actually where we struggle is not with necessarily experiencing emotions as they are, but it's when we fight against those emotions that we really encounter that struggle. So, you know, bringing in those things that I talked about before in terms of healthy coping, and also looking out for those signs of possible avoidance, which we're all inclined to do. And when we notice that, asking ourselves, you know, what's my motivation here? Like, why is it that I'm kind of trying to pull away from the discomfort right now? And what's kind of the short-term game versus the long-term game of doing that?
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. What really struck for me is your comment on being present with your emotions, right? So we have this scale of emotions, and it's easy to identify it when you see it elsewhere. But when you have it, you know, when you have an expression of emotion within yourself and being present with it, absolutely. And great segue into the next question for you, Anna, and that is, what are some spiritual practices that might be helpful in the present situation?
Yeah, I think this is, there's a lot to be gained here, because I think a lot of spiritual practices actually help that process of acknowledging emotion and dealing with it, and in a way that is on a regular cycle. So it doesn't only come up when there's a moment of crisis, but it comes up as a regular matter of fact. So, for example, I think the rhythms of a lot of religious practices, for example, become even more helpful at a time like this, when we're lacking so much structure in our lives, to be able to have a, you know, I'm a very unstructured spiritual person, but in this time of rather low structure in life otherwise, I've found great refuge in structured prayers, structured morning and evening prayers, for example, in a way I wouldn't have before, because it orders that life. As a team in our faculty, we meet now every morning for prayers at 9 o'clock, and it just provides a structure, a rhythm for us where we're bringing some of those thoughts and other aspects to the fore. And I think there are a number of practices like that. I mean, the practice of prayer, for example, is a place where you can express anything. You can be angry with God. You can be angry with people. You can be joyful when other people are sad. You can express all of that in a way that that is very healthy, I think, spiritually, and then has an impact on your body as well. We don't often in theology cite these kinds of statistics, but there has been research done and published in medical journals that talk about how people who share a spiritual life together actually live some significantly time longer. For example, there's a study that found that women who met in a religious service more than once a week had a 33% lower chance than their secular peers of dying in the 16-year follow-up study. It's quite fascinating. And they even did a study out of people having heart surgery, whether they lived longer if people were praying for them. And the interesting thing was they tended to live longer if they knew people were praying for them. Isn't that interesting? Because there was a great encouragement drawn from that. So I think the rhythms can be very individual in terms of prayer and so on, but there has to be that communal aspect as well, because that is part of who we are. And I think another big part of that is the calling to service out of ourselves. That is so much a part of a lot of spirituality, and certainly the spirituality with which I'm familiar. The calling out of yourself to serve others becomes hugely important. And I know certainly in a day when I'm thinking, oh, woe is me, I feel so much better when I've been able to say, I need to call somebody, I need to phone, so I need to do something for that person, I need to get their groceries. And this is something that we all, I think, have come to realize, that this is an important part of what it is to be a healthy human being. And these are practices of, these are spiritual practices that are part of who we are as a whole. I think worship is another thing. I know when it's Sunday and when it's not Sunday, because there's church online. It's bizarre. But you can watch 20, 100 services in a day if you want. I think you should just pick one that you like and stick with it, and focus, because it'll give you that one thing, that one community you're connecting with, one point of focus, together with these other practices that give us rhythms and means of expressing a whole wide range of feelings and thoughts at a time when it's just difficult some days. And I think it's a great time for us to recapture and to re-explore what it means to be spiritual beings.
So appreciate those words. Unfortunately, I had an opportunity to attend a virtual celebration of life and funeral within the last couple of weeks, and what was missing for me was that communal piece, right? Because it was very one-way communication. But to your point about helping others, it was post the service that the group of people who knew each other reached out to each other and did exactly that. So how can I offer help? Do you need something delivered? Do you want to just hang out and chat virtually? So absolutely, and brings it right back around to some of the opening comments about creating a routine, and some of that routine being providing help for people, and playing that role and a call to service. Absolutely. Kathryn, really pleased that you mentioned alcohol in your bit. I wonder if there'll be some questions and answers about that when we open up the Q&A. There's lots of Facebook posts and all kinds of other sort of funny, cartoony things about the amount of consumption of alcohol, and pictures of people's recycling and all that kind of stuff. And so I know it's a big piece for a lot of people. So glad that you brought it up as part of this conversation. So folks, listen, we have 20 plus people on the line. I'm keeping an eye on the meeting chat. Don't see any questions there yet, but happy to, as I said at the very beginning, allow for a verbal opportunity for folks to pipe in, unmute themselves and ask a question, either a general one or to specifically direct a question at one of our panelists. So I'll pause for a moment or two now and see if we have any questions.
What you can ask people to do is just if they want to do it verbally, they can just type Q in the meeting chat, and then you can see them and you can do them in order that way, as opposed to a bunch of people coming on the line all at once.
Absolutely. So Q, I'm assuming, stands for question, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So folks, if you have managed to open your meeting chat on the right-hand side of your screen and have a question, as per Jonathan's suggestion, if you'd like to type a Q, if you have a question, we would be happy to entertain that question. We have a question from Wendy Scott. Go ahead, Wendy. You may be on mute because we don't hear you just yet. I do see you are on mute. You can type it if that's easier for you, Wendy. And anyone else, if you have one. We have a question from Craig, and now we've got them coming in.
Now you're flowing in. Yeah, there you go.
So Craig says, I've recently moved to the area after being gone for 20 years. I don't know anyone and I'm feeling isolated because of COVID. How does one become engaged with their community during a pandemic? Thank you, Craig. And not directed at anyone in particular. So any one of the panelists, if you would like to take a shot at that question, please feel free. I see Kathryn nodding.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Because I think that speaks to a lot of people's reality right now. And it does make it more difficult when you can't get out to connect with others. I will say that there are different mechanisms online. So, you know, having just moved to the Nova Scotia area, I know a lot of people communicate through Facebook. So there have been a couple of community Facebook groups that I've joined, and this has helped me to develop a sense of community in the area, and also learn about other opportunities that might be happening online. You know, so for example, I know that there are some organizations that are doing like online trivia and those kinds of things as a way to try to connect. There are also online, you know, if you're looking for kind of support specific to a specific issue, there are some online support groups that you can find as well that are meeting virtually, and also just different kinds of social groups that are meeting virtually that, you know, you can kind of indicate your interest by doing like a Google search, and that's another way to try to connect. And then if you're needing more specific support to deal with particular mental health issues, depending on the area. So for example, in Nova Scotia, there are mental health helplines that you can call, and those are available 24/7. And they can get you in touch with a provider in the area. And there are providers who are doing telehealth services right now, so that you know, you don't have to wait until restrictions are lifted. You're able to connect with someone right away.
I had something there. When I first moved to the area 20 years ago, there's the Wolfville Area Newcomers Club. And that was something that I did for a couple of years that got to know a completely different community than my work community. I'm curious to see, you know, a quick Google search would probably answer the question if they are meeting virtually right now, because they were a very engaged group, and it was really neat to get to know some people that weren't, you know, at Acadia and in that normal group from the community. So I'd be curious to see if they're meeting online.
Great suggestions.
There's also the opportunity, if I could just say, that there may be places to serve. It would be worth contacting the food bank in town, for example, and some of those other services, a way of being able to help people even during COVID, which also at the same time connects with a whole other group of people.
Yeah, and the one thing that I was going to mention is I know the Wolfville Farmers Market was looking for volunteers as well to move on their pickup and delivery around their food. Everything's gone online, but they don't have adequate resources to be able to pay everybody, so they were looking for volunteers as well. So that's another option.
Yeah, absolutely right. And many of these suggestions, while they are Wolfville specific suggestions, because that's where the panelists are from and currently reside, many of them, and certainly the ones that Kathryn pointed out, will be, you know, applicable in all communities, right? Because obviously, surprise, everybody's in the situation that we're in, right? We have a question from Nathan. Are there strategies to deal with video meeting fatigue? It was fun for about 1 week, and then it started to be a headache.
I can actually take that one there. I've actually been reading about this because I found the exact same thing. Like after a week, you know, some days I have 5 and 6 hours of video meetings, and I am absolutely exhausted at the end of them. And I was trying to figure out why. And there's a couple things that I figured out. One is, for example, at work, I have a standing desk, so I don't sit much when I'm at work. And when I'm at home, you know, sitting in front of the computer doing the video meetings, I found just the sitting a lot really kind of fatigued me. And so that's one thing I started doing, was taking my laptop and putting it on a higher table and kind of standing during some meetings just to keep your body kind of moving a little bit. The other thing, there's been some research showing that these video meeting things, especially like Zoom, when you have 20 people on them, it's actually very fatiguing for your brain to pay attention to, especially when subtle movements, your brain is kind of geared towards noticing subtle changes, and that when you're in a meeting in the presence of people, the subtle changes kind of fade into the background. But when they're on a screen, your brain is constantly trying to figure out what moved and what didn't. And that can actually be mentally fatiguing. So one of the things to do, again, is in between meetings, going out for a walk around the block. It gives your brain a break. It can reoxygenate your brain and give it the resources it needs, because it's using lots of fuel when you're doing these very cognitively stressing meetings. Just the getting the blood flow going can actually get some nutrients to your brain, so you don't feel quite as down. Those are kind of two things to be aware of, is that these video meetings are actually cognitively quite challenging for your brain to do. So try and break them up as much as you can and schedule them at different parts of the day, as opposed to backing them one after another, so you can get that break time for your brain and your body.
There's also an advantage sometimes to opting for a phone call instead of
Yeah.
a Zoom call.
Yeah.
And we've moved a little bit towards intentionally breaking it up that way, because it's a very different engagement on the phone. It feels, again, now more personal after we've got so used to Zoom. And there's an almost a more relaxed, intimate connection on the telephone, because you're just concentrating on that person or one or two people on the call, as opposed to all the visual information you're trying to process. So I think to break it up a bit is not a bad thing.
Mhm.
One other thing I heard too was that businesses are now saying at the beginning of these calls to say it's okay to mute your video, like to go blank for a little while, because sometimes, again, it can be a little bit overwhelming to be on a 2-hour Zoom call knowing that everybody's looking at you for 2 hours, you know. So it's okay to kind of take a little vacation for a little bit.
Absolutely, and all wise words, and one of the things I think that we don't spend time accounting for is, I think it was you, Anna, who, in between meetings, right? So for many of us who have desk jobs and office jobs, and certainly that is, only a percentage of the population, but we account for travel time in between meetings, right? Because you're moving from one location to the other. Whereas when you're video conferencing, you go back to back and you don't even think about it. So, starting to schedule in those times in between meetings for exactly that purpose of getting up and moving about the house or the block or what have you. I see that Wendy says she had more of a comment. She says, thank you for this information. I was particularly interested in the first question, what have we learned about ourselves through all of this? She says, for me, a lot that I don't like, ! Smiley face, but certainly an opportunity to learn and improve. So absolutely. And a lot of times it just is helpful to have somebody say it to us so that we can take those suggestions and pivot in our current routines. Nathan says, good suggestion, stand walk between to rest the mind, phone it in, turn off the video periodically, thanks, he says. So absolutely, it sounds like, many of the suggestions are certainly resonating with folks on the line and giving us a lot to think about in the days to come and how we can make some adjustments. And I think for many, it was sort of thrown into this situation. I mean, yes, we had a little bit of notice that was coming, but I certainly felt that it was kind of like, wait a second, okay. And now all of a sudden I'm, working from home and social distancing and isolating. So you just kind of very quickly pick up a new routine and it needs some tweaks along the way. Absolutely. So we're getting close to the end of time. And before we called it a wrap, I wanted to provide an opportunity for each of the panelists to either touch on something that maybe wasn't addressed specifically with a question, or to provide us with one or two of your takeaways. Give us those golden nuggets that we can move away from this call and into the next days and weeks with. So why don't we do it just completely randomly and ask Jonathan to go first?
Okay. Well, I think this has been a fabulous little webinar, the blending of these balance points between nutrition and emotional wellness and physical wellness and spiritual wellness. I gravitate towards these kinds of things because of the interrelatedness of these topics. So that's great. And I think one of the takeaways, mine's not necessarily going to be about physical activity, but about looking at these kinds of things as, what's the opportunity here? And just like Una said, when this thing was thrust upon us, and I was, both my wife and I were trying to figure out how we're going to work from home and manage kids and all these things. One of the things that we did is we started reaching out to our support network. And, the initial reaction was the woe is us, because we're here and, our families live in BC and Quebec and things. And so we set up regular meetings with our grandparents. And so our kids now, my son has a, daily thing with his grandma at 9 a.m. to do spelling and things like that, and to do some math. And Isabella has a little bit of a thing with her teacher. But then in the afternoon, they both meet with my mom to go through creative writing every day. And then my brother and his partner, who are both musicians, they now have music lessons every Tuesday afternoon. And they never really got to talk to them that much. And they never really got to talk to my mom really that much in an engaged way. And now they're doing it on a daily basis. And my goodness, all the grandparents, and then my mom, or my wife's dad, does geography with the kids, does maps and things like that, every other day. And the gift that has been, like, we've always felt, so bad that we're away from family. And like you said, having routines is one thing, but having that connectedness of the social support system, and all the grandparents are all saying to us, this has been the best thing ever, to be able to get that daily connect time with our grandkids and with my brother and his kids and things. So the takeaway that I have is that, in every situation, even though this is a really, really, difficult, trying time, is to look for the opportunity in it, and to, just like I think Helena said there about people look to rush to joy instead of sitting in sorrow, and having that time to really reflect and go, what's the bigger gift here? And that's how we've kind of moved towards that. So that's kind of my takeaway of this whole situation.
That's great. Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm writing that down. What's the bigger gift here? I like that a lot. That's great. Kathryn, how about you?
So I guess one of the takeaway points would be just to be gentle with yourself. And that's easier said than done. I work on practicing that with myself every day, right? But we're gonna have days that things seem to be working okay and we're doing okay, and then other days or other moments where the anxiety comes up, or the sadness comes up, or whatever decides to rear its ugly head, and that's part of being human too. And so allowing all of those things to be there, and to be gentle in those moments where we don't handle it as well as we had wanted to handle it, and that's okay as well. And I think also recognizing our resilience. So I think in times like this, and when bad things happen, and we have a strong reaction, it feels like it will be there forever, that the depression or the, whatever ugly kind of emotions arise are going to be there forever. But in most cases, it doesn't, that it lifts eventually. And there have been a number of studies that have looked at people who have experienced horrible events in their lives. And for most people, they eventually recover. And we have this amazing capacity to be resilient in times of trouble. And sometimes when I remind myself of that, it helps make the dark moments that happen in life feel more tolerable, because I also know that it is a moment in time and it is not, forever looking into the future. And then I guess the last thing I would say is just, find ways to act no matter what comes up for you emotionally. So we can't, sometimes when we're feeling bad, then that's when inactivity sets in, right? I'm going to wait until I feel better, and then I will do X, Y, and Z. But is it possible that you could actually do those things even when you're not feeling your best, right? Can I get out of bed even when I'm feeling sad, even when I'm feeling anxious? Can I, put on my walking shoes and take a walk even when my heart's not really into it? And sometimes when we do that, our heart comes along, right? That eventually by acting in those ways, emotionally, sometimes we may notice a difference as well. And maybe not, and that's okay too, right? But we're still acting in the service of the things that are important to us in life, regardless of how we might be feeling inside.
Actually, that's a really good point that picks up on the physical activity thing. A lot of the number one barrier is time. The second is motivation, but motivation follows after you begin. So if you just take those first couple steps, then the motivation will follow you as you go.
Yeah, I saw lots of nods and affirmation, Katherine, as you were speaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Barb, how about you?
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, it's been a really big privilege to participate this evening and with my very learned peers. And I'm reminded of how much we bump up against each other. You know, a lot of the matrix almost of the common messaging, and not to forget that as we continue to figure out how to collaborate. It's really very positive. So I won't repeat what my peers have said. I think they're giving really important messages. But you know, one of the things that I've recognized is that need to be able to sit in solitude myself and find time to do things like bake, which most of you know that I love to do. I've been posting some baking things every week, and reading, and also taking courses. I've been taking some MOOCs. Last night I started one on the culture of China, which is an opportunity to really learn things that sometimes, because we do have very active lives, we don't have time for. So I am taking this opportunity, and I journal daily. And so I've been spending more time really trying, as Anna has challenged us to do, get at some of those bigger questions. And I don't have the answers, but I'm really trying hard to think about what my perspective is around some of those things. So that's been very helpful for me. And on a very kind of professional message, I just want to let folks know that if you're interested in information around healthy eating beyond what we talked about, there's a really good website, which is called unlockfood.ca. Very easy to find, and it has lots of good information, recipes for both now as well as when we get out of this COVID situation. So again, thank you very much for the support to participate. And hi to my roommate, Wendy. Yes.
I saw that little side chat. That was great.
I have stories, but I won't tell them tonight.
Probably that's a different virtual event. Anna, over to you.
Yeah, I also have enjoyed this evening. Thanks everyone for sharing from your experience and expertise. It's been a lot of fun. We could go for probably a long time. I think what really hit me when this crisis first hit, though, was how we had to surrender the illusion that we were in control. And I started out with that, and I think that's where I end up, is that it is an illusion. And so that leads to the question then, if this isn't solely my narrative, then whose narrative am I in? Whose story am I in? And what does that look like? And how does that relativize in some ways my individuality and yet create a much bigger picture of meaning? So as I've been ministering in different contexts in this time, the takeaway for me and the challenge, or the comfort, I guess I would throw to people, is that we are not alone. I'm convinced more than ever that we're not alone. When people are crossing over from life, they're crossing from life to life. They're not alone in that moment. And so when we can't be with them, I think it's important that we understand that and are able to, even if we can't grasp all that that means, to be able to live into that, at least in some way, and to know that in the sorrow, we're not alone. In the joy, we're not alone. And we're always pointed forward to hope.
And what fantastic words to end on. Thank you so much. Perfect. So folks, listen, thank you everybody for joining us from the alumni community on the call today. And thank you so much to the 4 panelists again for your time and your expertise and your contribution to the conversation. We, as I say, will be holding more of these, and we will reach out to everyone who is on the call today to get any and all feedback that you're willing to share with us so that we can continue to improve. And I really appreciate the time with my colleagues, and may reach out to you after this call with some further questions and some other opportunities that I would love to engage you in. So have a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.